Let's get this started by extending a warm welcome to Senator Manchin. Senator, if we were all in that meeting room or ballroom, we'd be clapping and thanking you so much for joining us. We sincerely appreciate your time, your service to West Virginians and to all Americans as a strong and outspoken member of the U.S. Senate. I welcome any opening remarks you'd like to make this morning.
Well, Rebecca, first of all, thank you. And thank you for inviting me, and thank all of you for being on today. And I want to thank all the community bankers, independent community bankers, for all they do for really so many people that live all over this great country of ours, especially in West Virginia. And I'm so glad that Senate Bill 2155, the Economic Growth and Regulatory Relief and Consumer Protection Act, has become law and has been helping. I understand very much needed help. You were not responsible. We've said this before, you were not responsible for the collapse, and you should not be punished and penalized because of the collapse. And also, in order for us to have recovery in rural America, we have to have you all up and running and doing your job. I think through the COVID relief packages, you all have done yeoman's job. I appreciate very much knowing your consumers, knowing your customers, knowing the need of your area economically. And willing to make sure the PPPs and all the different things that we tried to get out to try to help prevent an economic collapse was because of your hard work. So I say thank you for grateful people of a grateful nation. There's a lot going on, as I might, and any questions you might have, but I'll touch on a few. The climate change impacts, we're looking at that, but also the climate change impacts that financial services, financial institutions have basically taken and not knowing these areas as well as community bankers do, as you all do, independents, that they're taking a very harsh approach, I think, and shutting down the opportunities to continue to provide the energy that we need in this country to remain energy independent. I hope they would take another look at that and basically help us with as much through the technology and innovation. I've said there's a balance to be had between the economy and the environment. I really, with all my heart, I believe that. We've done more in the last 2 decades to clean up the environment than any other country. And we can do an awful lot more by developing the new technology with carbon capture sequestration that can be used in all fossil use to help make it much cleaner and eliminate the CO2 and the greenhouse gases. We know that, but we can't do it. And you're not going to have a better climate by eliminating. People think, well, if I can just eliminate all of the fossil that's being used in the country, if you eliminated every drop of oil, every MCF of gas, and every lump of coal, you're not making much of a dent in the global climate, because it's not called West Virginia climate or North American climate, it's global climate. And there's more fossil being used in the world than ever before. And unless we develop the new technologies that shows there's an added value to the waste stream of CO2, then it's going to be very hard for us to help with the cleaning up of the climate needs and the removal of the greenhouse gases. So this is an all hands on deck. We all have to be working in the same, and I would hope that a lot of the larger financial institutions would take a more realistic approach and not just knee-jerking approach to where shareholders are wanting to do this and that and everything. Your data security and data privacy protection. I don't need to tell you of identity theft, everything's going on with the cyber. Yeah. We all have a big responsibility there to tighten up and do everything we possibly can. The federal government has the responsibility to assist and work with you all to make sure your systems are more hardened. And we're going to work on that continually and making sure that happens. And finally, there's a lot of different social issues. The minimum wage is one that's come up. And minimum wage is something I think that every Democrat and every Republican in the Senate believe that it should be raised above $7.25. I don't know anybody that says leave it like it is. On the other hand, we have a dispute that goes on within our Democrat caucus and the Republican. Some Republicans would not want to go maybe as $11, where I think $11, and how I came to that conclusion, that basically we looked at the family of 3 that would live above the poverty guidelines, how much would you have to make? If you work 40 hours a week, 2,000 hours a year, which is 50 weeks, how much? And that comes out about $10.86 is what it would take a minimum wage to get you above that level. So President Biden has said that he doesn't think that anybody should work full time and still be below the poverty guidelines.
Mhm.
And I agree. And with that, I have an awful lot of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. We could vote and pass $11 overnight. We really could. And what it does, it takes basically 2 years after the pandemic and after this, the pandemic is termed to be over. And then it would take 2 years of equal increments to get the $11. Then we would index it after that. So we're working on all these things, but there's a group that just has adamant about $15. And I said, you know, I cannot believe for the life of me that we can't have a common sense approach that $11 raises the minimum wage 65% from $7.25. And that's a win in anybody's book, but it's not perfect. So they're letting the perfect be the defeat of the good if they just hold on to the 15. So we'll see what happens, but we have a good piece of legislation we're working on, and we think it's a proper way to move forward and also reward people who will make an effort and work full time and do everything they can and hopefully improve their skill sets where they can make an awful lot more. And I want you to know, we're not restricting anybody from paying more than 11. We're just saying the national minimum wage should be at 11 after 2 years after the pandemic is over. And then we index it so we don't get caught back in this political conundrum. We're working on infrastructure. I don't think that there's one of us that doesn't believe that infrastructure needs to have the investment and the attention it needs for a long-term recovery. With that, we have more than just the traditional infrastructure being put in an all-inclusive piece of legislation. And I truly have said, I believe that we should separate the legislation and take the infrastructure as we know traditional, water, sewer, roads, bridges, rails, trails, internet, and all of the things traditionally that we need to have the ability to succeed and provide for ourselves and our family. That's the infrastructure that we know, and that's the one we should do first. The other human infrastructure with all the needs, I'm more than willing to look at those as attentively as possible. I also, before we jump to conclusions on how much is needed, we should be looking at where the money that we have dedicated for the last year, over $6 trillion in this economy, which is totally unbelievable. What has it done? Where has it gone? And is it having the effect? Or is it still going out from the Treasury Department? And it hasn't, the full force of that hasn't been realized yet. Before we start spending other trillions, we ought to wait and see how the trillions we've already spent are affecting our daily lives and our economy and the ability for the United States to continue to grow. There's just an awful lot that comes by us, and people are wanting to throw the rules out with the baby with the bathwater, I guess you can say. And I'm just not in favor of that. I think we can, and I'll tell you, last week we voted 94-1 on to stop, which is what we call the hate crimes bill. Stop people from basically this directive hatred and trying to destroy people's lives and making it so difficult for them and so harmful to live in this society where people are scared for their own well-being. And we were able to vote 94-1. But we'd allowed an amendment process on the floor that anybody that wanted to have an amendment that was germane to the bill, they did. Those amendments did not alter the bill whatsoever. They lost. And everyone still voted, even after they lost their amendment. They still supported the good of the bill. And that's what legislation is all about. That's what negotiations are all about. And I think if we tried more of that, we'd have a much more productive than what we've been having. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions you may have or any concerns that you may want me to elaborate on. I'm happy to do that.
Well, I appreciate that. And first, I want to thank you. The common sense approach, certainly the community bankers listening today are nodding in agreement with you and appreciate your approach to so many of these topics that certainly are on everybody's minds. I appreciated that you started with Senate Bill 2155, and certainly thank you for that vote. You know, that bill had 67 bipartisan votes, and really, I think, shows that targeted and thoughtful regulatory relief can be debated and attract bipartisan support, which I think is part of the argument you were just making here. So 2 questions. One, do you miss your time on the Senate Banking Committee? And, it seems to us that certainly this bipartisan debate is needed more than ever and can be very successful to accomplish some great things.
Well, I do miss my time on the banking. I enjoyed that committee very much. What happens is, as you start moving around in different chairs and things of that sort, you're only allowed to have so many. And commerce is another one. I really enjoyed banking and commerce. Those are 2 very, very important committees. In West Virginia, we had nobody on armed services and we have nobody on VA. And the National Guard and our presence, what we do is very important to have that representation. So I was able to do that. And then being on appropriations, I had 2 Super A committees, armed services, and two A committees. You're only supposed to have 1, so it kind of knocked me out of having the ability to be on another one I would have loved to, which is stay on banking, but I'm still very close to it and all my friends are on it. So I have very good input there.
That's great. So I'd be curious, obviously you've been able to maintain the strong bipartisan approach to policymaking throughout your career. What advice would you have for our community bankers to be most effective during their virtual meetings as they sit down and interact with the 117th Congress in this very highly partisan environment?
Well, there's nobody that I don't think anybody in the Senate was not affected by January 6th, the insurrection that happened on our Capitol. And I've said this before, I never believed that I'd ever see in my lifetime or ever thought that it would ever occur that we would have our form of government being attacked at the seat of government in Washington by our own people. It's just beyond me to believe that could ever happen. But it did happen. We watched it and we saw the results of a tremendous amount of pent-up anger and hatred, mistrust, if you will, towards our government and the way we conduct ourselves. So I would think that maybe we should take a good hard look about how we should be changing. But you sure can't change by hardening it, by dividing it more and making it more partisan. That's not a way to cure the problem, I don't believe. So I think if anything, it made me more committed to working in a bipartisan, trying to bring people together and trying to show and through example that we can lead in a bipartisan way. And it can be for the good of the country and not the good of one's party or their own political endeavors. And that's what's happened for far too long. Everyone's more concerned about their next election or the tribalism of the party they belong to than they are about the services that they should be rendering to their constituents and the oath of office that we take to make a more perfect union. And we should be working every day to make that happen. So I guess the easiest thing for me to do is just roll over and say, oh yeah, well, we're never going to work together. So let's just go ahead and make the Senate just strong arm and a simple majority of 51 votes. And then you'll never have anyone trying to find that middle ground or that conciliatory approach. And I'll give you the voting rights bill. I was a former Secretary of State and I've been a former governor. So the 10th Amendment to the Constitution states rights is very dear to me, but also as being a Secretary of State, the most important thing that I had responsibility was to make sure that the elections were accessible to every voting age person in West Virginia, that they were fair. That means that there was an openness to the process, that we did everything we could to accommodate people, and that it was secured. So we had IDs and we could make sure that the people were voting were legally able to vote and were registered to vote. Those are things that we have a responsibility in the process. Now, the states, let's say Georgia, that's the one at the forefront right now, but other states are trying to make changes. They have a right to make changes if they think it'll enhance the quality of elections and it'll give opportunities. What they don't have is the intent of making it oppressive, regressive, if you will, and almost impossible for people to believe that it's been a fair and open election. And I would say this, the one thing that basically came to mind more with the Georgia legislature of what their intent truly was and truly is when they voted as a body in the Georgia legislature to take away the authority of the elected official who's responsible for the elections in Georgia, the Secretary of State, and take over those duties and responsibilities within the body of the legislature, which holds no one person responsible. You can't do that. So their intent was to obstruct justice, obstruct the voting process. So we have to look into that. But on the other hand, you can't do it in a partisan way. Can you imagine if we have voting law changes in this country that are only going to be voted on, supported by the Democrats or opposed by the Republicans, thinking that we have a process that's going to be really a good, open, fair process? We drive more people away from the thought process that our elections are safe and secure. So we're going to find that. We've got to find that middle ground, if you will.
So maybe one more question here, if I might, along those lines. I recently listened to a podcast in which you and Senator Murkowski had a great conversation. I love the stories of the two of you fishing together and how she protects her honey hole, but that's another story for another day.
She'll just tell you, she'll say, well, I'll see you in a little bit. And then she walks around a couple of different bends in the stream and I can't find her. And how'd you do? Oh, I did pretty good. How'd you do? I said, well, caught a few, but not many.
So you recently announced that you would be endorsing her. Obviously, these across the aisle endorsements are nearly unheard of these days. I wonder if you might talk a bit more about this.
Well, I guess the only two that's been done in the last, 10 years or more have been when I did 2 years ago, I did the one for Susan Collins. And now I did Lisa Murkowski, because these are two people that they're my go-to. We work all the time. And we try to find, I said, tell me what's going on your side. They said, well, fine, we're not going to get this. If we could take this issue out, it might make it better. I said, fine, I'll run the traps on my side. So we have that type of open, honest communication that allows us to move forward to find the pathway. You get rid of people like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, and I'll guarantee it'll almost be impossible to find that pathway forward on legislation. So I think it's hypocritical to say, oh, that's my very good friend. Oh, yeah, I really like working with her. Oh, yeah, but I really can't tell you because I'm a member of the opposite party and I really can't say anything where I think she should get reelected. Well, I have no problem with saying it. I think that she should be reelected, and I was up in Alaska, I would be voting for her, the same as I would have voted for Susan Collins in Maine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I know them as well from the legislative process than anybody else. I know that both of them represent their state. That's all they do, and that's what we're supposed to do. That's our first and foremost responsibility. So for me being afraid to say it, I just couldn't imagine that. So I was asked the question, and I said that. So we'll see what happens, but I think that Lisa's she's a good person, and she's here for the right reasons. Just because she has an R by her name and I have a D by my name doesn't mean that we can't have the utmost respect and be dear friends and trying to find for that common goal, which is bipartisanship. And we do it every day, every day.
Well, Senator, I'm loving the chat messages here. So many messages of thanks and your common sense approach. Another comment here, this is how elected officials are supposed to represent. So thank you so much for what you do. Also, regards from Tim Aiken in West Virginia, who says
thank
hi,
you. Please.
Definitely. He's listening on as well today, as well
thanks,
as
Tim.
many other community bankers from your great state.
Well, I'll tell you, we depend depend on them. And I've always, I've told people it wasn't for the community bankers, my family wouldn't have been able to survive in their small little business in a coal mining town that had its ups and downs. And it was always the bankers there to protect us and help us and carry us through tough times. And they knew that my father, my grandfather knew the people in our little town more than anybody else, and they relied on that. So when things got tough and sometimes you had to ask your banker for a little bit of extra time, but you always could believe in the people that you had extended credit to, that they would always come through, and they did. It made it so worthwhile. It really did. So I was extremely pleased to support community bankers, and I was extremely pleased to defend community bankers who had no involvement whatsoever in these horrific type of procedures that led to the collapse of our financial institutions. And I wanted to make sure that we could correct that. And I want to make sure that we still guard against any of that happening, retribution happening again. And we're going to be very careful. I will leave you with one thing that I've told everybody. I said, in today's tremendous amount of volume of information coming from social media, from cable news and all the different, it's hard. It is truly hard to find out what is factual and what's not. So you have to work a little bit harder. And I've told people they said, where do you get your news? What was funny, we had all 5 of the largest platforms, social media platforms, Facebook, Google, all of them. And they had their COOs and some of their top people there. And I asked them where they got their news, and not one of them said they got their news from their own platform. If that tells you anything, that tells you everything, not one of them. So I would tell all of you, PBS, public broadcasting, NPR, National Public Radio, BBC is very good for world news. There's a lot of good places where you can. And in all honesty, still the major newspapers such as the Post and the Times and some, they have extremely credible reporters. And on the nightly news, the NBC, CBS, and ABC, they can't afford to come out there and be one-sided or patriotic towards their patriotism towards one side or the other. Cable news, that's how they began their life. That's what they're expected to do, and that's how they make their livelihood. So put everything in perspective, and you can still find the factual and good facts that support that. And I leave you with this. You're entitled to your own opinion. You're just not entitled to create your own facts to support them.
So well said. Thank you, Senator. Really appreciate you being here with us today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate, Rebecca, so much, you all having me and the friendship that we've developed over the years and all the good work you do. Keep us informed. Our doors are always open. We need you to be involved, and we look forward to being in person the next time.
Definitely. We'll be knocking. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.